Very good morning and a very warm welcome to all of you here. It is indeed my privilege and an honor to chair this very important summit of retail thought leaders, industry veterans, partners who help us grow this business, disruptors, innovators, and everybody else who's involved in very, very dynamic sector of today. It's such an exciting time to be in this room and talking about retail. If you just look at the headlines that you hear around these days, India is about to become a 4 trillion economy, already the 5th largest in the world, aiming to be 3rd largest in not more than 2 to 3 years from now. A rapidly growing consumption, about to hit about $2 trillion. Retail market itself about to become $1 trillion. If those figures by themselves are not fascinating, look at what's happening on the other side of it, the digital India, which is transforming the way the country shops, the consumers look at our business, and the way we are ourselves transforming our businesses. The rapid growth of e-commerce, close to 50 to 100 million new consumers have joined e-shopping in just last 3 years, about 250 to 270 million transacting customers. Still small part of the business, but rapidly evolving ecosystem of digital play, whether it is in payments, it's in retail, the whole stack coming together. And if you combine all this with how it connects with our industry, it makes it even more exciting to be here. So ladies and gentlemen, as I stand before you here to talk about India's resurgence, a journey of growth and innovation, it indeed is a perfect moment in the history of this country's journey to be talking about this. But before I get down to where we are today and what holds in front of us, I think it's only fair, and many of you I can see around the room have been journey partners over the last 2.5, 3 decades of this journey. It'll be just to pull back and reflect around how this journey has played out. Not too far back in mid-90s, maybe I'm sounding old at that, but it wasn't that far back where this country was just starting to see first format of retailing. Department stores started to come just mid-90s to late 90s. Govind Shopper Stop came around that time. Many others, the Pantaloons and some of the other formats had started to come. Modern Indian retail started to happen, whether in food and grocery through smaller organized retailers or through department stores in this country, not too far away, 25, 30 years back. Over this journey, they have created a destination where you get everything under one store, all varieties, a place to shop for entire family need, convenience, superior retail environment, and everything else that we take for granted today. But it's got built in just last 2.5 decades. Around the same time, I think probably following this, but fueling this as well, was the emergence of malls across the country. The first few ones, again, coming in early 90s to late 90s, but more of them coming in 2000s, where consumers started to find the new destination, the cultural millennium, where entertainment, food, grocery, shopping, and just getting together and meeting each other, creating new places to spend time, and in some ways, the modern sort of place for communion which started to develop. And these two fundamental forces have shaped how the modern retail evolved over next multiple period. I think retail over if I were to just look at last 10, 15 years, combination of human ingenuity, creativity at the retail, as well as technology prowess, has created tremendous transformation in the industry, which started, as Sagar said, something which was prominent even 20, 30 years back, but often ignored as seen as something very basic and foundational. I would also say, just as I've seen this industry evolve and transform and continue to see that even more rapidly over the last few years, In some ways, this industry has remained the core of some of the principles, at least in Indian retail, have remained fundamentally true right through this journey. So while a lot has changed, equally an important part of Indian retail has remained same. The focus on consumer service has been the foundation with which retailers, the early retailers, the Kirana shops had built the consumer connect over a period of time that has created foundation of sophistication, but essentially that as a core principle has remained. Proximity, which is where you shop, continues to remain small part, and people are covering it in very different manner now, but has remained an ideal sort of platform to grow in. Value for money, anybody who's been in this country, who we know as Indians, that's something we put every product and every brand to fair test, and that's something that has continued to remain. So while a lot has changed over this period, I think equally important is what has remained same, and that's created the foundation of the retail as we know. I think, however, if you look at even as department stores and modern retail formats came in, till about 10, 15 years back, you could feel if you walked around Indian retail, if you looked at the global retail, that we were a few decades behind. Walmart's 50, 70 years ahead before modern retail started to come. Many other European retailers, whether in food and grocery, fashion retailers around the world, we were definitely 2.5 decades behind as we looked at the retail as it was evolving. However, the journey of last 5 or 7 years has been, if anything, phenomenal, both in the extent of change happen, the degree of change in terms of pure acceleration, and the direction of change, which is new thinking, new technology, and the manner in which the Indian retail is catching up has been absolutely phenomenal. And a part of that journey, I would say, has to be, part of that credit has to be given to the emergence of e-commerce and everything else that the digital ecosystem, e-commerce players themselves, many of the supporting e-commerce partners, whether it is in delivery systems, whether it is customer service, whether it's technology partners have created. And that's really been the foundation of the next generation of retail from regular modern retail that we had come to expect over the years. As I said, e-commerce, which was merely 3 billion or 2 to 3 billion in early 2012-14. In 2014, it was estimated to be 2-3 billion, is already about 60 to 65 billion. And there's no doubt, looking at the velocity, momentum, and the direction, that it's not going to stop at that. It's going to be 160, 170 billion in the next 3-4 years. So a lot of shape of retail, of how consumers shop, how brands and retailers serve, is also changing because of this new phenomena which has come. And you combine, as I said, that emergence of e-commerce, the change in consumer habits, the behavior change that's happening, the rise of new generation of millennial consumers, and combined with the rapidly evolving and India's pride in terms of the digital payment ecosystem which has evolved, clearly we are seeing a retail, as you look ahead, to be very different from the retail that we experienced in the previous decade and a half. And that, I would argue, is perhaps setting up India to be not just to be not behind by 2.5 decades that we used to feel 2 decades back or even 15 years back, to probably at the front end of modern global retail. Some of the technologies that we are building, some of the unique solutions that Indian companies are creating, some of the adoption of technology, not just in companies and corporations, but even consumers. The pace at which consumers have adopted to digital access. And of course, you have to give credit where it is due. More than 70 million mobile phones market, going to be perhaps 100 billion. The size of market in digital ecosystem, the data rates, which are some of the lowest in the world, the access to everything from entertainment to shopping is accelerating at a pace and innovating in a manner that the world is probably breathtakingly viewing. And in some parts of our retailing system, I'm confident over the next 5, 7, 10 years, we would be, if not leading the world, perhaps at the cutting edge as far as the global retail is concerned. Since I represent Aditya Birla Fashion, and fashion is something where I've spent more than 2.5 decades, it would be only proper that I talk about the way Indian fashion retail itself has changed. From small MBOs, curated brands selling maybe one or two products, to today's large number of lifestyle brands, channel having transformed from multi-brand stores to department stores, to exclusive retail outlet, now to e-commerce, creation of multiple new segments and multiple new brands and a proposition serving, whether you look at international luxury brands, the excitement with which they look at India today was clearly unheard of even 5-7 years back. You look at the growth of designer wares and the community of creators in this country, and a large number of them aspiring to dress India proudly and in a manner that Indians clearly are confident India of today is embracing far more boldly than before, has created a new segment of designer wear with many of them creating their benchmarks not just in India but around the world. The premium brands, the early stage which created the first stage of aspiration and fulfilling that, both Indian and global premium brands have created a large market in the premium end, which is where the meat of the market is. At the lower end, the value department store, the fast fashion players are constantly creating new markets, new consumer segments. So an industry which was just 20-25 years back was a very small industry with few brands, today is a very large industry and a source of perhaps a very large consumption story playing out over the next 10, 15, 20 years, whether you look at luxury, Indian wear, premium brands, value brands, retail formats, fast fashion. And to disrupt all of this further, you have the whole phenomenon of D2C brands, not just in fashion, but every consumer segments. They have a very different take on consumer. They're targeting a very different, today's millennial, Gen Z, and the next generation of consumers. Their go-to-market strategies are very different. They use digital more natively than through the labored effort that many of the conventional retailers like us do. They use a lot of consumer connection through user-generated content, the use of social media, the influencers, the role that they're playing. And suddenly you know retail, and especially fashion retail, is no longer brands telling consumers what to wear. In fact, consumers are not just telling brands what to do, but very often co-creating in the manner that some of these ecosystems are evolving. And therefore, closer home itself, I have seen how the definition of retail and the role that the consumers and the brands are playing, and therefore the fertile ground that's creating for the next generation of retail and the consumer markets that we are talking about. And if you combine all this excitement, the progress in technology, the flourishing creative talents that are coming, the platforms that are creating expression for smaller brands also, newer brands to come in, the new channels that are emerging, you combine all that with the whole consumption story of this country. Probably the only large economy which continues to prosper. Long-term trends are very positive. As we talked about, third largest economy in the country, in the world very soon. A very fast, rapidly rising consumption. And you have a concoction of very, very creative, very, very innovative, and very, very large possibilities for all of us to dwell in. And therefore, as we speak today in 2025 and look at 2030 and 2035, we perhaps are sitting at an opportunity which both in terms of sheer size, complexity, but equally creativity is perhaps at its best anytime. So Sagar, you didn't make a mistake when you came to this industry 20 years back. You just came a few years early. And I think the next 10, 15 years are going to be very, very exciting for the industry. If I were to just focus on some of the key trends that I think will shape how retailers need to think and move forward. And these are about changes. While the continuity is important, we need to be conscious about what will drive the next generation of growth, the next generation of customers. And clearly the first and the foremost is where this demand is coming from. Much of modern retail, whether it's fashion or grocery even more so than fashion, still remains underpenetrated. The tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 markets, the rising aspirations, greater desire to embrace better quality product, to buy brands, to have superior experience, combine that with this lovely mobile phone, low data rates, I think you've got an aspiration which needs to be fulfilled. It's our duty and responsibility and opportunity for all retailers to come in and fulfill that. So that's one large sort of shift that we'll all have to think about as we look at this opportunity. Second is, I think the age of consumer is changing. Indians being more conservative over a period of time, more of savers. I think if you look at the Indian domestic savings, used to be 35 to 40% just 15, 20 years back. That number is down to mid-20s or high 20s, which means we are less of savers, which means we are more of consumers. And that cannot be a better story for consumption than just knowing that more and more consumers are out there saving less, which hopefully is not a long-term problem, but consuming a lot more and wanting to fulfill their aspirations, their lifestyles, and really lead the next level of life that they want to live. That's a very powerful force, and a lot of it is being driven by the Gen Z, the next generation of consumers who have come in. This generation has got born in a very different system. They're more native to some of the things that we have learned over a longer period of time. They shop differently. The entire ecosystem that they embrace and immerse in is very, very differently. And therefore, to serve them, we'll have to do differently. So I think if retailers and brands recognize the two large opportunities, I wouldn't say just change alone, but these are opportunities of tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 towns, the large India that becomes available. Combine that with the new generation of consumers who are looking at you afresh, have a very different route to market, ways of consumption, expectations from brand and retailers. I think we have got two very large fulcrums of opportunity. At a macro scale, if I were to just look at some of the other key trends that at least we look at in our business, and broadly speaking is true for larger Indian consumption space, I think some of the themes would be, the first one I would call out is more around personalization. And I don't mean only in terms of one-to-one personalization, but I think from a world where you used to serve only very mass segmentation of rich, very rich, and poor and not so poor, I think multiple micro-segments are evolving. And therefore, retailers have to customize a lot more. And that's where smaller, smarter brands, more niche, more focus are creating bigger niche. All large retailers also will have to learn how to serve multiple customer segments very differently. And the extreme form of it, of course, is the extreme personalization, but it's a journey that we'll have to remember, I think. But the important thing is there is greater stratification of needs and consumer segments than ever existed in last 20, 25 years. I think second thing which I personally have been observing, at least in our industry of fashion, but I'm sure it's true for food, it's true for many other categories, is the premiumization. If you just look at last 20 years, the consumption from similar categories has grown 3 to 4 times. Some of it, of course, is the price inflation that has happened in products over a time. But I would argue the larger part of it has been driven by consumers wanting and seeking better quality products and willingness. When you combine this desire for aspiration, desire for better quality, with willingness to pay equally, you have a clear concoction of an opportunity of premiumizing. So we have benefited immensely and built most of our businesses around the theme of premiumization. I see that in multiple other product categories, more fundamental, more basic categories also. So that theme, to my mind, is a multi-decadal theme and will continue to remain strong. I think more recently, in last 18 to 24 months, and even more recently in last 2 to 3 months, it's not surprising that it's companies which put AI in front of them have their market capitalization grow phenomenally. You've all seen NVIDIA taking over Amazon yesterday among the top 3 or 4 market-listed firms. But if you take the fluff off and take the extreme technology piece out, I think the growth of artificial intelligence in the most user, and this is a 30, 50-year-old, 30, 40-year-old phenomena, but the momentum that artificial intelligence has picked up in last 18 to 24 months, especially through generative AI and other solutions, which have made it easy for regular people, us as consumers, for traditional businesses, more so for new businesses who are naturally more sort of inclined to adopt it, is going to create a whole new set of both opportunity as well as expectations from consumers, whether it's at the front end where consumers will more increasingly look for uh, you can serve consumer better through better insighting, more data-driven, automated approach, or maybe in a world not too far away, you're talking about the AR, VR, and the visual sort of experience that consumers will expect, and how retailers will have to fine-tune themselves. But if you were to look at the broad theme of technology creating both disruption, but equally opportunities for businesses, and not just at the front end of the business, I can easily see smart use of technology creating smarter, more agile, faster, and I would say more intelligent supply chains, which will not just take out costs, but create new business models, new value propositions, perhaps new players coming in very differently into our industry. And that's the third force that I would talk about. Apart from personalization, premiumization, I think adoption of technology will be another one. Rise of Gen Z, I've talked about it, so I won't spend more time, but I think that's another force. We need to, especially people who have been around long enough, will have to remember that the kind of consumers you served are very different from kind of consumers that we are going to serve. And therefore, shifting and rapidly shifting our ways to serve, product, value offering, participating in consumer journey very differently will be another force that we'll have to play with. Finally, I think this generation is also, and increasingly around the world, I think from fad to more substantive stuff, sometimes goes back to fad to more substantive stuff, but I think it is becoming more and more real. The sustainable products, the sustainable practices, ethical standards with which consumers in society holds, the front-facing parts of the business, whether it is business, retailers, brands, is only increasing. I think in India we've seen early signs of it, but perhaps if we were to build our businesses for longer term orientation, this is another factor that we'll have to incorporate. And retailers particularly, because retailers bear the brunt of consumers. We are the ones who give them the delight. We are also the ones who face the wrath of a customer who's unhappy. I think some of those expectations from sustainability, ethical practices, good corporate behavior is something that consumers are increasingly going to demand from the brands and retailers going forward as well. Many other functions are changing. Supply chain is changing very differently, but I would say one of the most profound change that's happening in the ways retailers and brands have worked in the fundamental role of marketing itself. From a one-time, two-time, large communication, above-the-line activations, to today's daily consumer generation, two-way traffic between consumer speak and you, ability to listen, social listening, engage with customers through influencers, and that too micro-influencers at some level, creating user-generated content, reaching out to consumer in a more authentic manner and more continuous manner. I think that's the other thing that all of us as retailers and brands have to continuously look at, because that's also transforming very close to us. So in conclusion, if you look at what's happening around us, you would agree that we are perhaps not just sitting on one of the most exciting markets in the history of, I would say, the only comparable examples where Americas in 60s and 70s, where consumption grew in that country, and perhaps China between 2000 to 2015, 18, where consumption grew. We perhaps are entering a phase over the next 10, 15 years where the consumption economy, where the consumers are going to see a very rapid growth, everything from per capita income growing from $2,500 today per capita to $4,500 is going to create a very large opportunity for us. But as large as the opportunity, as deep is the change that's happening around us. It's important, therefore, to be agile, to bring every aspect of consumer understanding, technology prowess, agility in our thinking and supply chain, evolving business models, and therefore retailers of tomorrow and brands of tomorrow will have to remain far more agile than we could afford to be in past. So in that sense, it's a challenging time, but I would say the larger theme, it's very, very exciting time. So once again, it's an absolute honor to be here in front of you, and thank you, the Economic Times team and the India Retail Summit team for inviting me for this session. It's a very, very interesting times for us and very, very exciting times to have. Wishing you all a very good 2 days, engaging, fruitful, productive, and very good times ahead. Thank you very much.